Let me show you how it's done.
Welcome. You are listening to The Drop, podcast on business, tech, and influence. I am one half of The Drop, Tam Danier, head of strategy. I lead insights and product. I focus on tech, in particular, solutions that solve real-world problems. And I'm here with...
My name is B. Pagels Minor. My pronouns are they, them, theirs. I have been a product manager for over a decade at some of the world's most well-respected companies like Sprout Social, Apple, and Netflix. I've led teams that built important parts of the App Store, launched games at Netflix, built listening at Sprout Social. All in all, my DNA is fully being a product manager.
So what are we talking about? Layoffs, not just that they're happening, but how they're happening and what does it mean for the future of work, right? And for some context, in the news again is Coinbase, who recently laid off 1,100 people, but just saw another 5% reduction in their workforce because of a policy against employee activism. 5% is about 60 people at this point. Elon Musk had a policy of mandatory immediate return to work, and that resulted in a 10% reduction. And so it seems like now employers are saying they're giving warnings to their employees, take it or leave it. And in some instances, not even giving a warning, just leaving it. They're getting laid off. So what's your take on that?
So I think there's two separate things here, because there's the layoffs, right? Which the layoffs all seem to be a symptom of a great deal of overconfidence. Like that's where I'm like, I'm going to say overconfidence because, it's not just Coinbase. So Coinbase did well during the pandemic. Peloton did well during the pandemic. Stitch Fix did well during the pandemic. Better did well during the pandemic. So these are all companies that were like, oh my gosh, look at how well we're doing. And I think part of it, there was a delusion there, right? Because they're saying, oh, we're doing well, even though it's a pandemic, and we thought there was going to be a downturn because of the pandemic. And the reality of it is that, the pandemic era, so from 2020 to now, actually probably until, a couple years from now, is going to be a unique part of the history of the world, right? Yeah. It's a unique part where people were primarily stationary and their shopping habits, the way that they invested were tremendously different. So like if you're thinking of it from like an archaeologist or sociologist or someone like that, or even an economist, it's like you almost have to completely slice this part of history out because it's a complete outlier. And somehow these businesses didn't think about that as a business fact, right? That this is a unique period in history that should not be representative of what the world will look like in 10 years or 50 years or 20 years. And so based on that overconfidence, or actually, in some ways, I guess it's reasonable to say ignorance, right? Like they fundamentally did not think about facts. They kind of operated in their own bubble and assumed things would continue to go well. They hired too many people, right? So that's first and foremost. Like almost every single one of those companies, when you actually even start looking at the areas of the business that are primarily being laid off, a lot of them are like HR functions, sales functions, these like extraneous, and I don't mean like HR is not extraneous, but it's like it's an over hiring in some of these roles that just didn't make sense considering the actual business that was at hand, right? Stitch Fix is like a great example to me personally because Stitch Fix, shopping for clothes. You can do it online. There's no question about it. Doing it online, it's really great. It's really effective. That's why we have free returns. But there's a huge part, especially when your market is primarily women. Women have a much harder time shopping online than people who are not women, right? And so there's a reality that people like to go into physical stores to touch the materials, to try them all on, so they don't have to go through the hassle or the disappointment of getting those clothes and they don't fit. And so, of course, I'm just like Stitch Fix. I was like, why did you think that, not only were you going to be fine after the pandemic ended, but also they also are trying to introduce a new type of business, right? So part of their new strategy is having someone be able to directly choose different items instead of just these fixes. So fixes are like something that's chosen based on certain categories and certain information that you provide to them. And it's like, so you're trying to change your product, your product fundamentally, and you also are doing and somehow you thought it was okay to both hire people, not thinking about how it's going to look on the other side of it. So again, it comes back to the same thing we say often here. It's like, there's still business fundamentals, right? Does not matter what else is going on in the world. You have to think about from a strategic standpoint, is this the reality of what my business is going to look like over time? And if you come to the conclusion that it's not, then you have to make decisions. And that's why, Apple's so great. I mean, Apple feels like going to the mom and pop store around the corner because it's so predictable. Like Apple always has a really good understanding of what their core customers are looking for and building those items and really creating a sticky experience that makes them a great company both to work at and also to have stock in, no matter what the circumstances are. So that's my opinion about the layoffs. It's just people just fundamentally not thinking about business principles.
I think you said that term a lot in a lot of different ways, like overconfidence. And I'm wondering if the overconfidence is a symptom of the design of this. You're giving a boatload of money made to make use of it. And it kind of reminds me of a lot of what happens in enterprise. A VP or a business group is giving a lot of money and it's use it or lose it. Towards the end of that fiscal year, they start making really reckless decisions, paying for things because they want to make sure that they get that money again. And I think that some of that kind of gamification exists in the startup world as well. We have to prove growth. We don't have to prove revenue. We have to prove growth. And so we have to justify that growth with hiring more people. I also do believe that the business fundamentals that you're talking about, just the game has changed a lot. This kind of mantra of go fast or move fast and fail quick is kind of the name of the game. I don't remember who was the CEO. I think it was the CEO of Bolt, who was like, you have to be able to make decisions that you can reverse. This was a statement that he made. And in that list of decisions was employees. So it's almost built into their decision making that, hiring people is an easily reversible decision. And I think that is the new lay of the land now that wasn't before, though some very astute economists or historian could probably lay out the journey of this, that this was coming for quite some time. We don't have pensions anymore, things like that. It's probably symptomatic for quite some time. But I think we're in an age where the employee relationship with companies is quite fractured, right? It's not a real holistic. Nobody goes into a company thinking they're going to retire with that company, right? It's a stepping stone. It's a pivot. It's one of my hustles. That's how we describe it. And I think that companies are starting to realize that embracing employee individualism is at odds with maximizing profits. And employees are realizing that there may be a cost to bringing your whole self to work.
It's so interesting that you say that, because I do think that there has to be a right sizing of the company's responsibility to employees, and then, conversely, the responsibility of employees to the company. Sure. I don't think that it makes sense. I do think that Coinbase and the base camps may have gone too far by saying this is a workplace. We don't want you to talk about anything else. Because, I think I said it to someone recently. I had my first baby in November, right? I now have a son. I'm thinking about schools. I'm thinking about and I'm concerned about who's going to be elected to, the school council. I'm concerned about who's going to be elected to the city council. That has nothing to do with whether I'm liberal or conservative. That has everything to do with I'm a human who wants my child to have the best opportunities that's possible. And so if I am concerned about that, it's probably okay for me to come to work and say, oh my gosh, these schools need to get better. It probably is okay with that. That's not me putting a moralistic, veil over someone's eyes. That's just me simply expressing the thing that's top of mind for me so that I can move on and do something that's professional. So I do think that to your point of can you bring your whole self to work? I mean, obviously we have these companies who are having a little bit of backlash from there. I mean, even to the point that there's some companies, which of course I can't think of it off the top of my head right now, there's some company that had previously had ERGs and has decided, ERGs, which are employee resource groups, they're usually by affinity, right? So you have a Black ERG group, you have Latinx, you have the women's ERG group, etc. And they said they're completely getting rid of them because they felt like at this point they're actually creating more division than actually creating the opportunity for those individuals to succeed.
What company was this?
It's a consulting company. I want to say it's so whoever listens to this, you can hold me to be honest, and I can say I cannot remember which consulting company it was, but I feel like it was like a McKinsey type company or something like that. That decided they were going to get rid of the employee resource groups. But don't hold me to the fact that it was McKinsey. I just think it was maybe a McKinsey. And it was so interesting to me because it goes back to this idea of what you say often, which are these systems created to actually create this outcome? And what I actually think the biggest issue is that too often people just fundamentally don't, like, they only half-ass things, right? You know, employee resource groups, for instance, can actually be very useful, like, because they can be a very useful resource to better understand the types of issues that are happening to different parts of, different employees, right? So, for instance, when I was at both Netflix and Apple, we had a lot of Black employees who were trying to rent properties and things like that in the Bay Area, and they were literally just being told, like, hardcore no, right? Like, they were just like, you're not the type of tenant that we're looking for, and it was very obvious it was primarily based on their ethnicity. But these are also people who are making 200,000, 400,000, $500,000. I mean, some of the engineers at Netflix were making almost $1 million a year, and they could not rent an apartment that was in like a just okay neighborhood. And so part of the question became, does Netflix or Apple have a responsibility to help with housing? And to that extent, what's really interesting is Google said yes, right? So Google actually has bought up, various property and things like that in the Bay Area that makes it easier for their employees to rent property, and they're also talking about building a lot more property as well.
Sure.
And so going to this idea of, like, what's the relationship, what's the responsibility of an organization to employees, what's the responsibility of employees to organization? I think that that's a great example of that makes sense, right? It totally makes sense that if you want employees to be co-located, so to Elon Musk and so to these other CEOs' point, they want people to be in the office. Well, what the heck are you doing to make it easier for people to be in the office? Right? There's obviously in Silicon Valley, there's like buses and things like that take people from point A to point B. And it still can take someone an hour or 2 hours or 3 hours to get to work every single solitary day. So why the heck would someone want to come into the office 5 days a week? Right? No, of course they would prefer to work from home where they don't have to deal with this particular transit. Right? The second part of that is, like, I want to go work in Silicon Valley and work for you at Tesla, Elon Musk. But I'm a Black person. Maybe I can't even rent an apartment there. So, like, what the heck am I supposed to do to go work for you? And so I think that's the complexity that bothers me a little bit about some of these policies, right? Because the first thing that you get from them, like, if you actually listen, like, look at some of these messages, you look at the tones, almost all of them come, like, the statement is, we believe that you need to be in the office because it's more productive. Right? It's like, well, what creates great productivity, right? There's a few different examples of that. So first and foremost, so I am an ambivert, right? So I kind of go from introvert to extrovert, and I go back and forth. Obviously, though, I can put it on. Like, if I need to be extroverted, I got you. I can do that.
Turn on the charm.
Exactly. And I have that ability, and I am not exhausted by having people around me, right? Like, I can be around people on a perfect time. In contrast, for example, my wife is a major introvert, actually. And so she actually would prefer to never leave her home. And she would prefer to be in the house, chilling. And she can have a full community of people that she just talks to online, through, her phone, through her laptop. And I think she would be perfectly satisfied. She only goes out to see people, mostly because I force her half the time, right? Because she's truly an introvert. But she's also ridiculously talented. Like, she's ridiculously talented. She's ridiculously good at her job. And so I can't imagine a world where, there's a one-size-fits-all in the situation of what productivity looks like. Because I can be productive in an office environment. Literally, there could be a marching band walking around me, banging on a drum, and I will still give you the same level of productivity. But I don't have any other complexities, whether it's, developmental or mental or anything like that creates an environment for me. I also am economically affluent enough that half the time I work right down the street from my office. And so that's the thing, that's that bigger picture of empathy that I think that is being missed here. Because productivity isn't just about being in the office, it's about having the best circumstances to be in the office.
I don't think that employers are incentivized to be empathetic, right? It comes down to, it's easier to hire for conformity than to hire for skills. That's very expensive. Than to hire top chefs that are going to bang out productivity without ever stepping foot in an office or not needing those guardrails, right? There are very few of us that are that self-directed, right? And so I think when you're talking about growth, can you really employ the resources to hire for that kind of skill. But I also think that there are things that are at odds with the initiative of a company that says we want diverse perspectives. The idea of promoting diversity, meaning we want diverse number of thoughts, a diverse number of perspectives, means that you can't be single-mindedness. These two things are antithetical to each other. And so a for-profit company has a single purpose to survive, and that means return value to its shareholders. That can be at odds with the mindsets of a diverse group of people. And so there are trade-offs. What does a company do in that instance? Like take the CEO of Disney, Bob Chapek, right? Not Bob Iger, the new one. And Florida's Governor DeSantis, who ended their independent special district, which was around since like the 60s. This special designation gave Disney total control of 40 acres where the park was. They're the biggest employer in Orlando. And the governor, in retaliation to a comment that Bob Chapek made about the Don't Say Gay bill, took it away from them, jeopardizing their stand. This is great implications. I think the news was saying that Bob Chapek should be fired and bring back Iger. I mean, all kinds of things. Because he took the side of his employees, because of woke activism. Like, that's a real existential crisis that CEOs have to contend with.
Well, but so on the flip side of that, so if you actually read more about that particular deal, what's really crazy about that is that because of how the deal is set up, it's something like the state of Florida or the counties around that area will owe Disney billions of dollars, right? So economically, it also is, so the CEO of Florida, the governor, I'm like, you're going to he made a multi-billion-dollar decision.
Right.
He gut check.
He was angry.
And the thing is, and what's funny is the counties around there, the cities around, Disney has already said, if we end up getting stuck with this bill, you're going to lose our votes. Right. So that's actually, so on both sides of there, so there's actually, I love that juxtaposition, right? And you have a governor who is more interested in punishing a corporation that has made his state at least billions of dollars, right? And over time, probably trillions of dollars if you really start thinking about inflation and all this other type of stuff, over something that is a one moment in time. Now, Bob, what's really interesting is true. You said it's about the employees. I don't think it was about the employees. I think it's also about the fact that, a lot of the people who go to Disney, not just when they're 3, but when they're 50 and 60 and 70 and 80, many of those people are part of the rainbow umbrella of humans, right? So it's also a very logical and strategic decision, because how can you alienate a large percentage of people who watch your content? So actually, I applauded the decision because it made sense to me both as, okay, you temporarily appease, both these people who watch and participate in your content, and you also appease your employees. Like, it made sense to me. And honestly, Florida, the economic decision that Florida is making is such a poor decision that it's probably going to get reversed. So there's actually really no risk to Disney in this particular case.
Except that it was bad press and a distraction for some time. And it brought up this discussion of, hey, woke activism, as DeSantis called it. By the way, I'm just taking the opposite view of you just because I knew you were going to say that. So it's not as if I really have this.
That's what we did. That's what we did. We always it's like we pretty much agree, but I love the fact that you're always like the devil's advocate. I appreciate it.
I just want to point out this angle, because here's what is interesting about this DeSantis and Chapek case is that Disney donated money to his campaign. $50,000. This is what
to many Republicans.
But this is what corporations do. They are in the business of returning shareholder value. And they have to be strategic, right, about the kinds of relationships they create at a national political level, but also a local political level. So even if it wasn't Chapek, it was Iger, who as a CEO says, we are doing business in the state of Florida. We need to give to whoever the candidate is, regardless of if we agree with those politics, how that can then be viewed and used against them because the zeitgeist of the internal culture says, no, DeSantis is a bad guy. Like, this is just the reality of the game, the lay of the land. And companies are saying that's bad for profits, right? We need to be competitive. Capitalism doesn't allow us to care. I think that's
and I think the other thing that we have to mention here is, there's only and I hate to say this because it's not being egotistical or anything like that. Yeah. But if you actually start thinking about the highest quality, best talented people in the world, right? You know, when you start thinking about there's like major tiers to this, right? There's like the first tier, second tier, third tier, fourth tier, whatever. And there's a significant drop off in talent as you go down these tiers. Like it's an actual fact. I mean, you and I have both tried to hire contractors and things like that for independent projects that we have. And we have sat there and been like, oh my gosh, this was so hard. It was so hard finding like just a couple people who had the qualities I needed to get what I needed to get done.
Right.
So to that point, I think it's interesting that even though companies have a responsibility, or it's obvious that they're engineering to hire the most efficient group of people possible. The point is at some point you're like, oh, efficiency also has a quality metric here, right? And so like I want to be efficient, I want to be economical, but I also have to have a certain amount of quality. And what's going to happen is that the quality is going to change dramatically over time. It's already changing, right? I've been like, you know, I bring up line all the time. And it's like so interesting to me because like both Meta and Google have also instituted similar policies to Amazon where they're going to be more stringent, or the review structure is going to change. People are going to be put on essentially what focus programs at Amazon. So at Amazon, you get put on a focus program, and basically it's like you have to improve or you're going to get pipped. You're going to get actually exited from the company. And so those two companies are doing it for the very first time, right? Because even they are like, okay, we need to control costs. We also need to control quality, right? And so what's going to end up happening, though, is the number of people who are the level of quality that's needed to move forward these large multinational companies, that pool is getting smaller. And so I do think that so what's going to end up happening is that companies are going to actually end up in this really weird position where they're going to be like, well, we over-engineered to try to make this so efficient and so effective, but now we're really in a bad position where our product isn't that great. I mean, to that Disney's technological products, so Hulu, ESPN Plus, Disney Plus, the ABC apps, all that stuff, they all had, like, up until like a year ago, they all had separate logins. There was no connection between any of them. Like, the experience is a complete shit show. And we both know that Disney's like technology and engineering teams aren't the same as Meta's teams. They're not the same as Google's teams. Right. And at some point, they're gonna have to get better, right? So it's just like, so I'm just saying, so like there's
to that point, the question is that part of the strategy to hire away the market? That is part of game strategy, right? When you say, hey, listen, we want to create a product, but our competitors want to create a product, right? We need to get out there faster. One way to do it is to work fast. The other way is to control the market. I don't know. They're probably borrowing from each other's playbook. In the record industry, you would give spec deals to a lot of artists. So you can control the market. If I already signed Drake and there's a Drake-like competitor, well, I don't want him out in the market competing with my Drake, so I'm going to put him on a spec deal and shelve them, right? And there may be some of that. This is more of a question going on in corporate where we're over hiring all of these, right? Put them in rooms so that, when we don't need them, we can let them down, but at least our competitors don't have them. Alternate theory, that's probably why Elon Musk wants them in the office, so they're not double dipping, working for
That's true. That's true. Every time I see a post from someone saying that they've been working 2 jobs during the pandemic, I'm like, how? I'm like, you had 2, both of those companies should actually be fired. Because like, how could you work 2 separate jobs making hundreds of thousands of dollars? Like, I just don't understand how you have
a lot of dead time.
A lot
of that shit.
It's either that or they're working 24 hours a day.
No.
I had no idea.
No,
but that's a good point. But then, so to that point, one of the things we talk about a lot is like, was this a good value? So if there's companies who are holding talent, like hoarding talent, just because they didn't want other people to have them, was that a good use of the funds they had?
And this is war strategy. Yes, we have a war chest. This is what we use there are a lot of ways to get to 10. When I, consult in this space, when you're talking about creative thinking and problem solving, I always give this explanation. There are a lot of ways to get to 10. 5 + 5 = 10, but so does 9 + 1, 8 + 2, 7 + 3. You can go on and on, get into fractions, divisions, and all of that. Figure out the one that works the best, and it'll get you there, right? These are levers that you can pull. Elon Musk can say, create this plan, come into the office immediately or you're fired, right? And that can be construed as we need more productivity because our roadmap is robust and we're just not going to get this thing done. Or that can be viewed as, what's the quickest way to cut 10% of costs, right?
Yeah.
Instead of hiring or creating a project of restructuring, which will cost millions of dollars to do, I'm just going to create a policy wholly out of thin air that I know a majority of my people cannot actually comply with, and I will immediately reduce my cost by 10%. Can't make an accusation. I don't know what was in his head.
Well, and to that point also, so for instance, he's already said on multiple occasions that, you know, individuals who are like really excellent might have a separate situation. So that does control for quality too, because, you know, before they sent out that email talking about everyone should be in the office, I bet there was a separate email that was sent to the important people. That was like, well, what do you need to be happy? So to your point, that you're correct. It's always important to remember that there's a lot of different ways to get to where they're supposed to get. But I also think that, like, to another extent, though, what happens when, even for the people who are treated differently, so the select few, like, what happens when they're just like, well, but this might not look as good on my resume now, right? And so that's something that's actually, I've had this conversation with people. Because they were like, yeah, you know, I used to, like, Twitter is a great example. So Twitter used to be a company that if you had it on your resume, it was pretty useful. Like, people understood, like, the quality that you were kind of, you know, operating.
Contributing to, right.
But all of this mess that's been going on with Twitter, the number of people who've left Twitter, the number of executives who left Twitter, all of a sudden it's like, well, how's it going to actually look on my resume, right?
Yeah.
And it's going back to the idea of how employees might think about companies now, right?
Right.
It's like, I only want to work at companies that are going to move my career forward.
That's right.
And it's like, if you ever feel risky, right, you feel risky that you're not going to be able to do that, then I'm just going to leave you. Like, I'm going to bounce. This is not a good situation for me.
I agree. 100%. I think that is the new dawn that we're going to. I think that there are so many ways for people to make a living, right? Entrepreneurship is on the rise. There are startups whose whole purpose is to create the tools that make it easier to be an entrepreneur. So that trend is happening. The new hustle is happening. I think that the future employees are going to look at and future employers as a means to an end. You're either on the way or in the way. And to be quite frank, I think anybody, the kind of culture that's being created around the behavior of some of these companies probably puts them at risk in the future of being able to hire, to your point, right? Like, take a look at Coinbase. If Coinbase puts up a site and says we're hiring, I mean, I'm kind of looking at that like, you're one Ja Rule away from a fire festival, man. I don't know.
Actually, Ja Rule works for the fire festival.
This is what I'm going to say. We're walking and be like, where's Ja Rule?
Yeah, and you know, and to that point also, it wouldn't surprise me that in a few years, like, you know, all these folks are making these cuts because they think it's going to control their expenses. I bet when you actually look back on it, it probably won't do much for the expenses because I feel like you're going to end up with like other economic forces that are going to create additional expenses, whether it's, you know, the materials you need, or even if, when it comes to retaining the talent that you currently have, or recruiting a talent for like key positions, right? Because I think even the companies that are hiring freezes, there's going to be teams that they're going to be building things that you're going to have to recruit the right person for. So what's end up happening is,
I mean, this is a company, by the way, we are talking about Coinbase, and you sent me that article, how they pivoted into snitching. You know, the work that I do is in this space of product market fit. This is clear misalignment, right? That screams there's a group of people who are not clear about what they're doing and they're making shit up as they go along. Where's Ja Rule is the question.
Yes. You know, he's probably drinking a bottle of champagne in the Coinbase's CEO's office. And that's why they're not doing what they're supposed to be doing, because they're hanging out with Ja Rule.
That's securing the land for the company holiday party. He's got to get the Bahamas Islands sanded out, leveled out, because there's a company party going on.
Yeah. No, but it is like, it's just so fascinating, right? So like, so come back to a second. So when I worked at Apple, we had to badge in everywhere, right? In fact, it was so extreme at Apple that, like, let's say if someone was coming in behind you and they didn't badge in, you were literally supposed to be like, no, you can't come in here. Like, you can't. Like, so badging is like a big deal, and especially in Silicon Valley, badging into places is a big deal. And like, I've always known that they could track it because, like, for instance, there was a situation once I remember, so a person that I knew that they worked in the building. They didn't have their badge. And so I let them in, and a security person was like, "Who's that person that you let it?" Like, literally, I got a call on my office phone. We had an office phone. I got to call my office phone. So, who is this person that you let? I was like, "Oh, I know exactly who this person is. They stay in that office," and I did follow up with them, and they did go to the admin, and they did whatever. They're like, "Okay, cool." Like, it was like literally monitoring. So like, so for context for people who are listening to this, it is like legitimate monitoring that they do of you in Silicon Valley. So no problem. Like, that happens. What I took umbrage to is like, and it's not just Elon Musk and Tesla. Like, there's been a few of these, like, because there's also been in financial markets, things like that, where they've literally been like, come back to the office, and then they follow up by sending these emails saying you haven't been in the office. And I'm like, well, first of all, like, if I put on my like, I manage people, how do I actually get people to do what I want them to do hat? The first thing I would do is send the email saying we expect you to be back in the office, and then attach to that a phase plan of what that ramp up looks like, right? So it's like, okay, we expect you, like, I send an email, let's say on the first of the month, and it says, for the first week, we expect you to be in the office at least 1 day. For the second week, we expect you to be in the office for at least 2 days. For the third week, 3 days, and so on and so on and so on. And so by, let's say by like, 6 weeks or 8 weeks, you're fully back in the office 100%. Right. And there's two reasons I would think that. Like, so one is, again, being a new parent, I'm thinking how hard is it to pivot, and if you have children, if you are taking care of, your older, so there's a lot of people who are doing both of those different types of things. What if you sold your car and now you got to buy another car because there's like not a convenient bus to get you there? Like, there's a lot of things. I mean, for some people, they weren't even in the same city and state that they were in when COVID started, right? So there's a lot of complexity to like what I would immediately think of in terms of like, why isn't a person in the office? That's the first thing. So I'm going to try to solve for why they might not be in the office first by ramping this up. The second thing is I would say, hey, talk to your manager. Make sure your manager completely understands, and your manager has to get approval. Like, you don't have to go to any HR. Like, go talk to your manager, explain what the situation is. You have to have approval. And then I would have a system that that manager can say, hey, FYI, B's not going to be in the office until actually week 3. Please don't bother B. And then only after I did all of that would I send an email to someone saying, hey, I haven't seen you badge yet, right? And it's because, like, shame and fear, I don't care what type of company you're at. Shame and fear is not the way to get your best productivity from employees. It just isn't. They show up there, they do work, they freaking hate their lives, or worse, they're so sad and depressed that they just are like those shrunken in people who like just don't, like they're just not productive because like they literally just don't function. They do not function.
B, I hear you redesigning this process for a better outcome. And I'm offering to you, I think he got his outcome. He's a very calculating guy.
No. So this is the thing. The reason I'm bringing this up is because I'm having conversations with people who work at Tesla, who are completely bought into Tesla, who are completely bought into those financial companies, who are completely bought into these other companies, who are for the very first time looking for another job. So even though he got what he wanted, he may have gotten it too much.
Yes,
right?
yes.
Because now because these are the people that they're risky to lose, right?
Yeah.
Because the assumption was, obviously the assumption is the people who are the least productive or who are less productive are the ones who are going to leave. But oftentimes it's not them. Because if you aren't as talented, why would you leave? Like, it's like, I am lucky I got this job in the first place. I'm going to stay here. It's the person who has the ability to move who moves.
Right.
And that's my point. So my point is I'm re-engineering the process, not because I don't want 10% of the people to leave. I'm re-engineering the process so I can get the right 10% of the people to leave.
In the future, what is the litmus test that employees are going to be giving to employers to figure out whether they should join? It used to be a one-sided thing. Why do you want to work here? Like, you called me. Now, what's the new move employees are going to be saying? What questions are they going to be asking?
So I think there's a few questions. So first and foremost, how the hell are you going to develop me? Right? Because like this is a business transaction now.
What are your
right?
intentions?
So, like,
you're kind of like dating. You're like a guy, like a father. Like,
exactly.
What are your intentions with my daughter?
Exactly.
Right?
It's like what skills are you going to get me? How are you going to level me up? How are you going to make me attractive to the next employer? I think that's like the number one most important thing. Right?
Okay.
It's like that's why, like, for instance, even companies that have tried to do alternative things, like, so for instance, like, Netflix just implemented levels in engineering, and so now it's much more comparable to the rest of Silicon Valley. And for some engineers, that's actually a great thing, because now if you go interview at another company, you can say, I'm an L6 at Netflix. That means I should be at least an L6 at this company.
Yes.
So like, people are going to want parity and then understand very clearly what your value is to them and how you level up their career. I think the second thing is they're going to want a different compensation structure, right? One of the big things has always been, getting equity. It's like, okay, I'm going to go work at this company. I'm going to have a basic salary of some kind, and I'm going to get a large part of my salary in equity. So there's equity is going to change in two ways. So first, people are going to want their equity front loaded, right? So they want to get their cash as quickly as possible so then they can make other strategic choices.
Yeah.
And secondly, they're going to want to pivot more of that equity into their actual salary. And so coming back to that question about expenses, and that's another reason why I think expenses is going to be a problem for people, is that they're not going to be cutting people's salaries as much as they think they have, because people are going to want to transfer that equity into actual cash, and they want to get that equity, up front. And so that means that it's going to be more expensive for companies in the short term. So that's the second thing. I think the third thing is that they're actually going to really, really care about who the leaders are. I remember when I first started interviewing, when I was a little bit younger in my career, I'd be like, I don't have to be concerned with my manager. Like, my manager needs to be cool. I'm like, no. Now my director needs to be cool. My VP needs to be cool. My senior VP, my CEO. I have to have a lot of confidence, because I think Peloton's a great example. The previous CEO, who was the founder, he should never have been the CEO once that company actually public.
For sure.
He did not have that, or he just didn't have what was needed to be able to successfully run a company. But he had great personality. And so I feel very different. Like, I'm like, if you're not on Sam Cooke level of brilliance, do I really feel safe with you?
Right.
No, probably not.
I felt that way about WeWork. Very questionable.
Yes.
Very questionable.
Yes. And I'm like, Adam Newman, I'm like, you are a brilliant communicator, brander. I need you to do that. You can't do the business stuff.
To me, he was a yoga instructor, and I'm not going to work for my yoga instructor, my Pilates instructor. You know what I mean? That's
exactly.
You're great.
They can inspire me.
That's it. But I don't trust you to make really hard decisions. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. I mean, actually think about it like this. So on most like military bases, right? Like on many military bases on naval ships, there's a captain and there's a chaplain, right? Yeah. So there's a person who helps make sure that things get executed, get done right. And there's a chaplain who's like the faith leader who helps them navigate difficult circumstances. I'm okay with a chaplain being whomever and being like, woosah, whatever. But my captain, I need to be sure that person is not going to get me killed, right? That's right? And it does feel like a certain type of death to invest a lot of time and energy into a company and believe that's going to create a financial, certainty for you, and then have the person not be able to steer that ship. That feels like a sort of death. I'm not trying to get killed in my personal or my professional life, right? Like, I need to have that stability and know that there's a plan that's in place. And I think that's what's going to, that's the drastic difference that's going to happen. And I think that and again, the leaders, like the cult leader people, that's not going to be what's it. Like, it's going to be those people. It's like, I want to look at you and think, that's my grandma or my granddad who's real stable, who have been retired, who will retire on time, who don't have nobody for money.
The raw kind of spirited type of coming in a Ferrari, doing drag racing into the parking lot, Mr. Cool Guy. That archetype is to your detriment, not popular.
Exactly. Stability is key.
Yeah. You want a dad bod CEO. Exactly. You want a CEO with a dad bod. Listen, I like all of your points. I'm going to keep this one really simple and just say every company is different. So you're just going to have to learn how to spot Ja Rule. It's kind of like Where's Waldo? Come in and be like, if I see a Ja Rule here, I got to go.
Yes.
That's my only tip. I don't have a list of questions to ask, because I also believe that companies are very crafty in their marketing messages. They probably have an AI machine that's generating these responses. So they're outrunning you with the algorithm.
Oh my gosh. I think it's so funny that you mentioned that. So my wife and I have been watching this show called Fairfax that's on Amazon Prime.
Yeah.
And there's a whole segment of Welch's grape juice. They created the perfect AI to create like the most thirst in people. And one of the characters, this young boy, fell in love with the AI. because like she was so perfectly set up to do exactly what you wanted. And to your point, I feel like that's what it is. Like you have a good point there. Many companies try to shape themselves into who they need to be to attract X, Y, Z. And the number one thing we have to do, we have to have like that X-ray vision, the vision that goes through and sees to the core of what they're really trying to do. And the thing is, it takes work to do that though, right? So like the interview process won't be, oh my God, just got an interview, let me go show up. It's let me research every single solitary thing that they've done to figure out what's going to happen, because I can't risk, having this backfire for me.
Lucky enough, I've been around a while. I interview people as much as they interview me. I've got a lot of questions for you. And I can say that at this point, I've got a pretty good rubric of how I can evaluate. For someone just coming out of college, you really don't have that. I think you should expect, if I'm talking to somebody 18 years old, 22 or something, just came out of college, expect that you're going to have a couple career changes. Expect in your lifetime you're going to see the stock market crash. Expect that you might get laid off. You might have a couple hustles. You're not going to have this vision of being able to see, but you should learn from each one of them. Hey, I remember this happened and then this happened. Start connecting those dots. So you'll be able to look at that Where's Waldo picture and be like, I see him. He's right there, and pounce when you need to. Things are going to change. It's going to be very interesting going forward.
Well, it's so interesting. So, you and I always try to predict what's going to happen, right? Like, it's one of our favorite things that we do. And it's so interesting because we're in the second economic downturn. So the last one was in 2008. So 2008 was about housing. This one is just, it's so many. It's like COVID, like the interest rates being too low for too long, the market doing too much, blah, 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 blah. But there's only 14 years difference. Mm-hmm. And so I think that, the rates of these economic downturns, it wouldn't surprise me that, decade and a half, like every decade to decade and a half, this happens over and over and over.
I agree with that. We're going to see the length between them shorten. I believe that this crash and the next crash is going to be related to hype, meaning fake money. Overvaluation of things that aren't true. What is parallel to the housing crash is fundamentally what was happening in the housing crash is we were saying you have an asset, you paid $100,000 for it, and on paper overnight practically it turned into $200,000 and then again into $300,000 and over and over and over again. This on paper value kept growing, but people were borrowing real money for it. Their salaries, their real income was not growing at that same rate, but they were borrowing fictional on paper money at that same. Now there's too much digital money in circulation that's not real. Eventually that's going to crash. And I think this crash is very much related to the crypto market and the NFT market, this on paper type of leveraging that's going on. I'm going to promise you 18%, but I'm not getting 18%, right? This is on paper, your value is growing. There were times when these stock accounts were giving a participant 100 times margin. Yeah. You have $1,000 and get $100,000 to play with. This is on paper money. And so then they start trying to extract that money out and they can't. They're saying, we got to shut down and allow no more trading because they don't have the money. It's not that there's a system error. It's not just that they didn't have engineers that didn't design for this kind of load. They literally don't have that money because it was paper money.
Yeah. And so I think that's happening. And that paper money popped up everything. Like I was reading an article last night about the Rolexes. And how Rolex had been, selling for 2, 3, 4x their prices because, these crypto bros were going in and paying straight up, $50,000, $60,000 for a $20,000 watch.
Right. You took fake money and now real money.
Exactly. And then the Rolex industry is starting to, it's starting to even out and starting to become normal again. And so it just goes to this idea that it really did, heighten for almost every asset, every type of asset. It created this artificial level of value that is now a bubble. But what's really great about that, right, is that if we can always just come back to one.
What's great about that? Tell me.
No, it is. But what's great about that is that hopefully for some people it goes back to this very general idea. Look at what's in front of you. Yeah. Think about what it actually takes to build or create or do that thing, and then pay that price. If someone asks you for, 2x, 3x, 5x, 10x, it's probably not worth that. So just wait. Just wait, because the reality part of this is important.
Right. There will be another crash. I think we can expect these dips to happen quite frequently. I don't have enough insight to say how frequently, but yes, more frequently than we previously thought, 100%.
Thank you so much for listening to the Drops Podcast. We love having you. We love your feedback. Please do connect with us across social media. We are the Drops Podcast on Facebook, Twitter, and TikTok. And we also have a great email, thedropspodcast@gmail.com. You can send in any questions that you have, and we definitely would love to answer them on the podcast. Feel free to ask just about anything because we have experienced a ton of different things. Again, thank you so much for listening to the Drops Podcast.